You are looking at an old photograph from 1898. At first look, it appears harmless. A young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sits in a Victorian parlor holding a porcelain doll. It seems sweet, doesn't it? Maybe he is playing with his sister's toy. Maybe it is just a normal family photo. That is exactly what archivists believed for nearly 125 years. But in 2023, when modern digital restoration removed decades of damage and fading, something new appeared in the image. Something hidden in the shadows, something that completely changed how the photograph was understood. What once looked like a cute portrait became one of the most heartbreaking images from the Victorian era. That boy was not playing, he was grieving. In February 2023, Dr. Margaret Chen, a digital archivist at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., was working on a routine restoration project involving Victorian-era photographs when she came across an unusual cabinet card dated 1898. The photograph showed a young boy, around 8 or 9 years old, sitting in what looked like a Victorian parlor. He wore dark, formal clothing, knee-length breeches, a dark jacket, and a white collar. In his arms, he held a large porcelain doll with a finely painted face, dressed in an elaborate white lace gown. At first, I catalogued it as unidentified boy with toy, circa 1898. Dr. Chen explained in an interview. Boys playing with dolls was not strange during that time. She nearly moved on to the next image, but something about the photograph unsettled her. The boy's expression was not playful or cheerful. It was deeply serious, almost heavy with emotion. His hold on the doll was firm and protective. The pose felt formal and deliberate, more like a ceremony than a casual portrait. It suggested that the image carried meaning beyond what was visible on the surface. Because of this, Dr. Chen decided to put the photograph through high-resolution digital restoration. The original cabinet card was badly damaged. More than 125 years of foxing, watermarks, fading, and surface decay had hidden important details. Using advanced imaging tools, she slowly removed the layers of damage one by one. As the restoration continued, hidden elements began to appear. First, she noticed that the boy's clothing was not everyday wear. It was formal mourning dress. The fabric was black crepe, a material commonly used during Victorian mourning. A black armband was visible on his left sleeve, a clear symbol worn after the recent death of a family member. Next, she enhanced the background. The entire parlor was covered in black fabric. Heavy Victorian mourning drapes blocked the windows. On a small table beside the boy sat a framed photograph wrapped with a black ribbon, another traditional mourning practice. A vase of fresh flowers, likely funeral flowers, could also be seen nearby. The most revealing detail appeared on a small card at the bottom edge of the photograph. Once enhanced, Dr. Chen was able to read part of the text. Memory of Clara, age 6, April 1898. The most shocking discovery came when Dr. Chen studied the doll at the highest resolution. The doll's face showed a level of detail far beyond ordinary mass-produced Victorian toys. The features were unique and carefully crafted, not generic. The face looked like a real child, not an artist's standard design. The hair was not mohair or an artificial fiber. It appeared to be real human hair, brown in color, carefully styled. Dr. Chen reached out to experts in Victorian toys and mourning customs. They asked her to examine specific elements, the porcelain quality, the clothing style, and the way the hands were constructed. Their conclusion changed everything. This was not a regular doll. It was a memorial doll, a Victorian death effigy made to resemble a child who had died. On the back of the cabinet card, barely readable even after restoration, Dr. Chen found a handwritten note, Thomas Whitmore, age 8, with memorial, likeness of his sister Clara, age 6, taken 3 weeks after her passing, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, May 15, 1898. Photographer J. W. Black and Company. This was not a photo of a boy playing with his sister's toy. It was a memorial portrait. Thomas was holding a custom-made porcelain doll created to look like his deceased sister, Clara, who had died just 3 weeks earlier. In that moment, the photograph changed completely. What once seemed like a curious Victorian image became a powerful record of childhood grief and a family's desperate effort to hold on to the memory of a lost daughter. To understand why the Whitmore family would commission such a doll, we must understand how the Victorian era viewed death, especially the death of children. In the late 1800s, child mortality was heartbreakingly common. In the United States, nearly 1 in 5 children died before the age of 5. Illnesses such as scarlet fever, diphtheria, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and whooping cough took thousands of young lives every year. No family, whether rich or poor, was safe from the possibility of losing a child. This harsh reality shaped Victorian mourning culture into a highly formal system of rituals meant to openly recognize grief and quietly manage loss. When a child died, families entered strict mourning periods that could last for years. Parents, especially mothers, wore full black mourning clothes for at least 1 year and sometimes much longer. Homes were covered in black crepe fabric. Mirrors were draped. Clocks were stopped at the exact moment of death. All social activity came to a halt. Victorian society did not simply allow open grief, it expected it. Mourning was a public display of love and sorrow, governed by firm rules about dress, behavior, and length of time. Not mourning correctly was seen as shameful. Beyond these public customs, families looked for more personal and physical ways to stay connected to their deceased children. Photography became central to this process. Post-mortem photography, where the dead were photographed, often posed as if asleep, was very common, especially among families with limited means. For many parents, these images were the only photographs they would ever have of their child. These pictures were not viewed as disturbing. They were treasured keepsakes, the final way to preserve a child's physical presence. Memorial dolls offered an even more physical form of remembrance. The creation of these dolls was uncommon and mostly limited to middle and upper-class families who could afford the high cost. For those who could commission them, the dolls served a deep emotional purpose. The process was detailed and deeply personal. A skilled doll maker, often the same artisan who produced fine decorative porcelain, worked from photographs of the deceased child and long discussions with the family. The maker sculpted a clay version of the child's face, carefully copying unique features, including the shape of the eyes, the curve of the mouth, and the structure of the cheeks and nose. This clay sculpture was then used to form a porcelain mold. The porcelain was fired at very high temperatures and then carefully hand-painted to match the child's exact skin tone, eye color, and lip color. Glass eyes were chosen to closely match the child's own eyes. Most importantly, real human hair, almost always taken from the child after death and preserved, was attached to the porcelain head using traditional wig-making methods. This meant the doll contained an actual physical part of the child who had died. The doll was then dressed in clothing made to match the child's real outfits, often their best Sunday clothes or a favorite dress. In some cases, families provided actual garments that had belonged to the child, resized to fit the doll. The cost was very high. A custom memorial doll could cost between $50 and $200, equal to about $1,800 to $7,200 today. To understand the expense, this amount equaled roughly 2 to 8 months of wages for an average worker in 1898. These dolls served several roles within grieving families. They gave grief a focus, a physical object that could be held, cared for, and kept close. For surviving children like Thomas Whitmore, they offered a way to continue a bond with a lost brother or sister. Parents could tend to the doll as they once cared for their living child, which helped ease the painful shift from daily parenting to mourning. Some families displayed the dolls openly in their homes for many years. Others stored them carefully and brought them out on anniversaries or during especially painful times. In a few cases, the dolls were buried with the mother when she passed away, symbolically reuniting parent and child. By the early 1900s, as child death rates fell because of better medicine and public health, and as Victorian mourning traditions slowly faded, memorial dolls became much less common. By the time of World War I, the practice had mostly disappeared. Today, surviving Victorian memorial dolls are extremely rare and highly prized by museums and collectors of mourning objects. They reflect a lost era when families faced the death of children through formal public rituals and deeply personal private acts that modern viewers may find both moving and unsettling. After identifying the photograph, Dr. Chen spent several weeks researching the Whitmore family using census records, city directories, death records, and old newspapers. What she found was a heartbreaking story that explained the reason for the memorial portrait. Thomas and Clara Whitmore were the children of Edward Whitmore, a textile merchant, and his wife, Margaret. The family lived at 1847 Spruce Street, in Philadelphia's Rittenhouse Square area, a respectable middle-class neighborhood. Edward Whitmore ran a wholesale textile business, supplying fabric to tailors and dressmakers across Philadelphia. Census records from 1900 indicate the family lived comfortably. They employed a live-in servant and owned their home, both clear signs of solid middle-class status. Clara Elizabeth Whitmore was born on March 3, 1892. A family Bible, discovered by genealogical researchers, described her as lively and affectionate, fond of singing and learning the piano. A church bulletin from the Second Presbyterian Church noted Clara's participation in a children's Easter program in April 1897, where she recited a poem. Thomas Edward Whitmore, born in 1890, was 2 years older than his sister. School records show he attended Philadelphia Public School on Locust Street. In early April 1898, a scarlet fever outbreak swept through Philadelphia. Scarlet fever, a bacterial infection mainly affecting children, was one of the most feared illnesses of the time. It began with a sore throat and high fever, then developed a bright red rash across the body. Severe cases could lead to pneumonia, kidney damage, or heart failure. A notice in the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin on April 17, 1898, listed the Whitmore home at 1847 Spruce Street as under official quarantine for scarlet fever, a standard public health measure. A red quarantine sign would have been posted on their door to warn neighbors to avoid contact. Death records from the Philadelphia Department of Health confirmed that Clara Whitmore died on April 22, 1898 at 2:30 a.m. The official cause of death was scarlet fever, with complications including pneumonia. She was 6 years, 1 month, and 19 days old. Her funeral took place on April 24, 1898, and she was buried in the Whitmore family plot at Laurel Hill Cemetery, Section 14, Lot 23. The funeral was necessarily small. Quarantine restrictions and fear of infection limited attendance to immediate family only. 3 weeks later, on May 15, 1898, the Whitmore family went to the studio of J.W. Black and Company, one of Philadelphia's most respected photographic studios on Chestnut Street. They brought a porcelain memorial doll that had been commissioned soon after Clara's death. The doll was made by Sarah Mitchell, a Philadelphia doll maker who specialized in memorial pieces. An invoice in the Philadelphia Historical Society archives shows the family paid $75 for the memorial doll, a significant sum equivalent to roughly 3 months of middle-class wages. The photograph was carefully staged. Thomas, dressed in formal black mourning clothes with a mourning armband, was posed holding the memorial doll, representing his deceased sister. The parlor was arranged with mourning curtains, a memorial photo of Clara taken shortly before her death, and funeral flowers. This memorial portrait served many purposes. It created a visual record of the family's grief, showing they properly honored Clara's memory. It allowed Thomas to be photographed with his sister one last time and preserved the image of the memorial doll, which might eventually deteriorate or be lost. The Whitmore family's story after 1898 shows the long-lasting impact of Clara's death. Census records from 1900 show the family still living at the same address, but Margaret Whitmore's occupation is listed as none, likely reflecting ongoing grief and depression. Edward Whitmore's business declined in the years after Clara's death. By 1905, the family had moved to a smaller, less expensive home on Pine Street. Edward died in 1911 at age 52. His death certificate lists heart failure as the cause, but family letters suggest he never fully recovered from the loss of Clara. Margaret Whitmore lived until 1923 and never had another child. According to her obituary, she requested to be buried holding a small porcelain doll, almost certainly Clara's memorial doll, reuniting mother and symbolic daughter in death. Thomas Whitmore survived to adulthood. He married in 1915 and had 2 daughters, but family stories suggest he was deeply affected by his sister's death. He reportedly kept the 1898 memorial photograph in his home for his entire life, and often told his daughters about Clara, the sister he lost when he was just 8. The photograph of Thomas holding his sister's memorial doll is not just a historical curiosity. It is a carefully created piece of Victorian memorial photography, produced by professionals who specialized in documenting grief. J.W. Black and Company, the Philadelphia studio behind the photograph, was one of the city's leading photographic establishments. Founded in 1872 by James Wallace Black, the studio had earned a reputation for sensitive and dignified memorial and mourning photography. Victorian memorial photographers faced both technical and emotional challenges. They had to create images that honored the deceased, comforted the grieving, and followed strict social rules about proper mourning, all while working with the limits of 1890's photographic technology. The Whitmore memorial portrait shows the photographer's skill in many ways. First, the composition is carefully arranged. Thomas is positioned slightly off-center, creating visual interest while keeping attention on him and the doll. The doll faces the camera directly, making its features fully visible. This was not accidental, but a deliberate choice to highlight the memorial likeness. The lighting is soft and even, achieved using natural light from large studio windows, diffused with white fabric. This gentle light avoided harsh shadows while providing enough illumination for the slow photographic emulsions of the time, which required several seconds of exposure. The background and props were arranged with care. Black mourning curtains set a somber tone while creating contrast that makes Thomas and the white, dressed dolls stand out. The small table with Clara's framed photograph connects the living memorial, the doll, and the photographic image. Fresh flowers add a subtle touch of life and beauty to an otherwise solemn scene. The photographer also focused closely on Thomas's posture and expression. The boy sits upright but not stiffly, holding the doll with both arms in a protective embrace. His gaze is direct and steady, conveying both grief and dignity. Technically, the photograph is flawless. It is sharp, well exposed, and carefully toned. The albumin and silver print process used by J.W. Black and Company created rich tonal gradations and fine details, capturing the delicate features of the memorial doll and the texture of the fabrics. But beyond technical skill, Victorian memorial photographers understood the deep emotional meaning of their work. For many families, these images were the only way to preserve the memory of a lost loved one. The photographer wasn't just creating a picture, they were making a sacred object to be treasured for generations. The care taken with the Whitmore family portrait is clear in every detail. This was not a rushed commercial job, but a careful collaboration between a grieving family and skilled craftsmen who understood the weight of their task. The finished photograph would have been delivered to the Whitmore family several weeks later, mounted on a thick cabinet card with the studio's name embossed in gold at the bottom. It would have been displayed prominently in their parlor, a public statement of loss and a private touchstone for grief. Today, this photograph survives as evidence of Victorian mourning culture, memorial doll practices, and the artistry of memorial photography, but most importantly, as a record of one family's love and loss preserved for 125 years. When Dr. Margaret Chen completed the restoration of Thomas Whitmore's memorial portrait in March 2023 and shared her findings, the photograph went viral, gaining millions of views across social media. The public reaction revealed something surprising about how we relate to Victorian mourning today. Many viewers initially found the photograph disturbing. The idea of creating a doll in the image of a dead child, having a living sibling pose with it, and preserving the moment in a photograph seemed macabre to modern eyes. Comments ranged from creepy to traumatizing to why would anyone do this to a child? But as Dr. Chen and other historians explain the context of Victorian mourning culture and child mortality, the conversation shifted. People began to see the photograph not as disturbing but as deeply human, a family using the tools and customs of their time to cope with terrible loss. This photograph matters today for several reasons. First, it gives insight into how our relationship with death has changed. In 1898, death, especially the death of a child, was an unavoidable part of daily life. Most families experienced the loss of at least one child. Mourning was public, formal, and extensive. Today, death is largely medicalized, institutionalized, and hidden from view. We have fewer cultural scripts for grief and less experience with child loss. The Whitmore family's memorial practices, the doll, the formal mourning, the photograph, were normal, proper, and necessary expressions of love and grief at the time. Understanding this shows that our discomfort reflects modern attitudes toward death rather than Victorian morbidity. Second, the photograph reminds us of the progress in child health and survival. Clara Whitmore died of scarlet fever, a disease now easily treated with antibiotics. In 1898, it was a death sentence for thousands of children. The memorial doll and photograph are artifacts from a time when parents faced the constant possibility of losing a child, a fear now greatly reduced by medicine. Third, the photograph illustrates the universal human need to preserve memory and maintain connection with those we have lost. While we may not make memorial dolls today, we engage in other practices, social media memorials, video tributes, keeping rooms unchanged or wearing jewelry containing ashes. The methods change, but the human need remains. Fourth, young Thomas Whitmore's experience shows that children grieve differently from adults, and involving them in mourning rituals can be important and healthy. Modern grief counselors recommend practices similar to the memorial photograph, allowing children to acknowledge loss, express grief, and maintain symbolic connections with deceased siblings. Finally, the photograph has personal meaning for the Whitmore family descendants. After Dr. Chen shared her research, she was contacted by Linda Whitmore Harrison, a great-great-granddaughter of Thomas Whitmore. Linda had grown up hearing family stories about her uncle's sister, who died young, but had never seen any photographs or details. Seeing this photograph and learning Clara's story was incredibly moving, she said. For 125 years, this image sat in an archive, unidentified and unappreciated. Now, Clara and Thomas's story has been recovered. Their grief has been witnessed. That feels important, like honoring their memory the way they deserved all along. The restored photograph has been added to the Library of Congress's permanent collection of significant Victorian memorial images. A high-resolution digital copy has been shared with the Whitmore family descendants. Thomas Whitmore, the 8-year-old boy holding his sister's memorial doll in 1898, died in 1962 at age 72. He carried Clara's memory his whole life. Through the rediscovery and restoration of this photograph, that memory has been preserved for future generations, ensuring Clara Whitmore, who died at age 6 in 1898, will not be forgotten. That seemingly innocent photograph of a boy holding a doll is in reality a profound record of love, loss, and the lengths families go to preserve memory. Clara Whitmore lived only 6 years, but through this photograph, through her brother's grief captured in a frozen moment, her memory survives 125 years later. Sometimes, the most powerful photographs are the ones whose full meaning only emerges when we take the time to look carefully